each. So also, all this information has been uploaded to the Facebook group. So if you just want to view it electronically, it's up there. If you want an actual piece of paper, it's here. So I don't know how many people, but if you, anyway, we'll go over it. And the cookies are fresh out of the oven, so please.
Smell great.
All right, well, you know what? It's 6 o'clock. We'll start. Yay. Well, my name is Rich, and I am the alderman of the 4th Ward, and I'm part of the Finance Committee, and one of the things is that I realized is that the cemetery, which is a beautiful cemetery, costs the city like so much money every year to maintain. Because by law the city has to, maintain the cemetery to a certain level of conditions. It costs the city about $300,000–$400,000 a year to maintain. And I said, what are other options? And there are other cemeteries that do other means of raising funds, such as the Oakwood Cemetery in Troy. And they do it all. They raise $300,000 a year without any taxpayer dollars, and they maintain a 300-acre cemetery. So I'm like, you know what? If these other cemeteries can do it, we could do something. We could do something. And you put something out there, and you see people show up. So anyway, so what we have here, there's a couple things, just administrative kind of things. There's a Facebook group. So hi, welcome. Hopefully you're all in the Facebook group, because that's where I post the meetings and whatnot. If not, there is an email list also. So if you're not on the email list, I will put you on the email list. What else, Rich? I think that's it for now. And so the Facebook group is called Friends of the Hudson City Cemetery. So if you find that, I just posted this meeting up in the general Hudson Area Community Board group with a link to the Facebook group. So you can click on that, and then you get into the group. If we want to, maybe we want to go around and just introduce ourselves, like a brief blurb about, I think we did this, we were here in October, so this was our second meeting. I know the holidays kind of pushed it aside, and thank you all for coming out today, which is a much nicer day than before. So let's go this way.
Okay, I'm Julie Metz. I live in the 2nd Ward. That's it. I'm Denise Ohl, and I live up at this housing development. So I use that all the time.
My turn. I'm Carol Osterink. I write the Gossip to Rivertown, and I walk my dog in the cemetery every day.
I'm Pat Van Off. I'm the Hudson historian.
I'm her better half. Jerry. I'm Paul Barrett, and I live across the street from the Hudson City Cemetery.
I'm Carol Friedman. I also live on top of the hill near the cemetery. I'm Sue Tenerowitz. I spent last summer cleaning the Revolutionary War headstones. So I like it clean.
I'm Jim Boone, and I go in good weather to the cemetery pretty much daily just to enjoy it.
My name is Dominic Branty. I live in the 5th Ward, and I visit the cemetery. I have many family members there to visit, so appreciate it.
And I'm David Bickett, and I also live on top of the cemeteries.
Well, welcome everyone. At the last meeting, Vince approached me. He said, should I do a survey? And I said, sure. So he did this survey, and we're passing it around. Like I said, please feel free to take a copy. There's multiple copies. And he went through and cataloged the conditions of various monuments and stones, and it's which quite amazing. And he went through the whole list and did each one.
Cemetery or the Hudson City Cemetery and the Cedar Park Cemetery.
I think it's just the Hudson City Cemetery. That's what it says. Yeah.
Upstairs.
Like I said, all this is uploaded to the Facebook group too. So if you want to see it,
I have it
anyway. But it is really good if we want to go after grants or anything else, like what needs to get done. I had a brief agenda that I posted about some of the things that we talked about. Number one, well, not in any particular order, the historical designation of the cemetery, like how can we move that forward? If we want to do a stone cleaning day, maybe, or plan other events throughout the year here, we could set some dates maybe today, that would be nice. The nonprofit status, and I met with the group yesterday, so I'll talk a little bit about that. And then anything else that you wanted to bring, anyone else wanted to bring up, so I'll leave it kind of open. Did we want to start with maybe historical designation center?
Sure.
How do you feel about that? Okay.
I feel fine about that. Since our last meeting, I've been in touch with Bill Krattinger, who is the person at the State Historic Preservation Office who handles National Register listings and nominations for same. He was thrilled to know that we are finally going to do this. The original part of the cemetery, the Hudson City Cemetery, was inventoried in 1985 by a woman named Shirley Dunn, who did the inventory for the Hudson Historic District, National Register Hudson Historic District. But the nomination for the cemetery was never acted upon. So Bill was thrilled, but he said, I want to think about this a little bit because we have a stickler for regulations here, and it's possible that they will want you to designate the entire cemetery rather than just the Hudson City Cemetery. So he said, I want to think about this for a while and I'll get back to you. So I said, fine, and I sent him some information that I discovered, and Pat probably knows much more about this than I do, some information I discovered about how the Cedar Park Cemetery was acquired, how and when. And at the time, they needed to expand the cemetery. They needed a new cemetery, actually. And they looked at various places, and actually the grounds of the Bronson House, then the McIntyre Farm, were considered as a possible place for a new cemetery. But as it turned out, they bought the area, another farm, which was just across the road from the existing cemetery. So I sent him, some of that information that I had discovered. I sent him pictures of the two arches, one that says Hudson City Cemetery, one that says Cedar Park Cemetery. And he, sort of some other information. And a week later, he got back to me and he said, well, I've thought about this, and it might be good to sort of show, certainly a case that can be made that these are two separate cemeteries, but they're now managed as one. But it might be interesting to show the other cemetery, which is a different design with different motifs in the tombstones and various other things. And I was hoping he'd come back with a certain recommendation, like do the whole cemetery, or it's okay to do just part of it. But he didn't, so he sort of left it up to us, and he said, we, meaning, the State Historic Preservation Office, will support you whichever way you want to go. So if we nominate just the Hudson City Cemetery, most of our work was already done in 1985, and we just need to, sort of go back and update all of that work that was done then. If we want to do the entire cemetery, then we have a lot of inventorying to do to, make the case for that to be designated as a historic cemetery. And there's, as I said, I walk my dog there every day, and I'm sort of aware of a lot of stuff that would be part of that inventory. And quite by serendipity, I was contacted by someone at the Metropolitan Museum of Art because they were going to do this show based on drawings from the Tiffany studio, and she wanted to know about a mausoleum in the cemetery that had a Tiffany window in it. And so, we've got a mausoleum with a documented Tiffany window in it. So, and that's in the Cedar Park part of the cemetery. So it's really it's probably, I don't know how we can come to this decision, but it's, one way or the other. I think, it's going to be more work for us if we do the whole cemetery. It might be a little bit of a challenge. There might be some pushback from the community if we do the whole cemetery. I don't know. It's a conversation that I think we need to have, and to, decide which way we want to go. It would be a lot easier for us if we just did the Hudson City Cemetery, I think.
Can we start with that one and then do the other one later?
No.
No?
No. We do one, or, we do it one way or the other.
But you can't apply for the city cemetery and get that on the registry and then later...
Well, we'd have to do it as two separate.
Two separate
Yeah.
things, but we could at least get that one done now, and then we could go back later after
Right.
we've had time to...
But I think,
inventory.
the point that Bill was trying to make is that if we decide that we're going to treat them as two separate entities, then we've made that case, and then it's going to be more difficult. We need to then do the other part of the cemetery on its own merits.
Carol, for the viewers, could you explain the difference between the two cemeteries?
Oh, well, the Hudson City Cemetery is the original cemetery. And around, what was the date, 1895 or so, they were running out of space in the cemetery, so the city needed to acquire more space for the cemetery. And they looked at several different plots, and it was just sort of by accident or by serendipity that they ended up buying the plot that was the land that was right across Tenbrook Lane from the original cemetery. And that's called Cedar Park Cemetery. The original cemetery is called Hudson City Cemetery. And they're...
How big are the parcels?
Well, Cedar Park is considerably bigger than the original cemetery. And they're laid out differently. Cedar Park is definitely the rural cemetery movement with, curving drives, and it's just and a different kind of landscaping. The drives, the paved drives that are now in the Hudson City Cemetery, were added quite a bit later. I mean, they were just, I don't know what was there first. They make reference to little paths that went through the cemetery, but it wasn't, they're design-wise they're different. And the stones are different because of what was fashionable in funerary art during, this different period. So
Thank you.
you're entirely welcome. So anyway, that's kind of what we need to think about.
Do you not think that the Cedar Park Cemetery could make a case on its own merits if it has a Tiffany?
My concern about the Cedar Park Cemetery is that it's an active cemetery. People are buried there,
Oh, I see.
continue to be buried there, and friends and relatives come and mourn their loved ones in that cemetery. And there's already been, the mayor was approached by a woman who was quite outraged that, there were going to be tours of the cemetery, and that the cemetery was going to become this, I don't know what she thought it would be, but I don't know. There should be other people's opinions besides mine going into
Is that what
this
you meant by
decision.
pushback from the community?
I'm sorry?
Is that what you meant by pushback from the community?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
If it's an active cemetery, then maybe there is a case for just doing the old one now, and the work's been mostly done, and at least that gets done, and then there might be a way. I know I've talked to Bill Prattinger because we're buying a house on Allen, and we're seeing if we can get some tax credits for restoration. And he does seem very nice, and it seems and very helpful. my thought was based on what you're describing, that if we did the old one first, and maybe once that's done, and if it all goes very well, and people see the benefit of it, then maybe the people in the community who might have had some concerns about the active one might feel differently, and then we could just go back and do a wet inventory later.
And you know what, Cal, I'm sorry, and just maybe to go back a little bit, I mean, in terms of, the purpose of historical designation status, like, what does that, like, for those of us who might not know, like, what does that bring with it? I mean, is it, like, for instance, I could see it being an advantage if we apply for grants to have a historical, designated cemetery, but what else would it help with?
Well, first of all, the historic designation sort of is a recognition that it is, a place of historic significance. I mean, if there's not a great deal that...
There's no downside or...
The downside would be that you can't, rip up the, you can't alter the cemetery, but you can't alter a cemetery to start with. But, I don't know that there is a downside. But the downside, I don't know. I really don't know if, if the designation would inhibit some of the, the decoration of graves that goes on in Cedar Park or not, I don't know. But, I mean, that's the sort of thing that people would fear would happen because you can't, when I don't,
Right.
with National Register, I mean, the city of Hudson or the Hudson Historic District was a National Register district since 1985, and a lot of sort of unfortunate things happened in that area during that time because it's the thing is it's local designation. It has the force of law to prevent inappropriate alteration. So I really don't know that there is any downside.
Carol, you said that it started the process at one time. What stopped it?
The city didn't want to pursue it, I would imagine. I mean, Shirley Dunn, who did a lot of inventory of the whole city, and the cemetery, the older part of the cemetery. And I'm not certain why it wasn't pursued in 1985, probably because the city decided they weren't, it wasn't interested at that point. Do you remember?
I think that is the reason, yeah.
What, they just weren't interested?
Really?
Yeah. I think the important thing about that cemetery is your founding fathers are buried there. And that is so important to restore that cemetery. Historic.
Yeah.
Shirley Dunn, she did that cemetery?
She's the one who did the inventory, yeah.
I don't remember that. I know she did the 85
Right.
district.
No, her name is on the cemetery.
Because she did like the Robert Taylor house, but that never was put on the
Yeah,
register either.
She lived in, in 1985, she lived in Skodak. I mean,
Right, yeah.
She became very interested in Hudson and did a lot of...
Yeah, I remember meeting her because she had a meeting for the public hearing.
It sounds like everything you're saying sort of seems to make sense to go for the old one now, where there won't be pushback of any sort, and then the work is mostly done. And I bet if it happens and the community can see the good of it, and that it will, with better management, it can actually save the city money, and there could be a lot of that kind of benefit, especially if it becomes an organization that can self-fund or at least can partly fund. I think people would see the good of that, and then they might be more open to designating the other one at a later time.
But you're talking also, it's a long period of time it would take to do this, years.
No, it doesn't.
You don't think so?
I don't think so.
Do what?
To designate it?
No, not to, I'm talking about to do the work itself, to go in and.
To inventory the other.
The other
The
one,
Cedar
the
Park
Cedar
Center.
Park.
No, I'm talking about the old part, to go in and, and to basically do the work, to restore, do the restoration and clean up. And all
Oh, yeah,
that.
that's
Yeah.
another story, but
Yeah.
we were just, Carol was just
Yeah.
addressing how long it would take to actually designate it as a historic site.
Yeah.
I don't think that takes that long. I mean, there's paperwork and stuff.
Yeah, things are kind of slow, right? I mean, sometimes it can take a really long time because, there's some other thing that's going on. I remember when the Bronson House was being designated, had been nominated to be a national historic, what is it called? Anyway, the higher level National Historic Landmark. Everything got held up because somebody during that period, someone had gotten like a landfill somewhere in California designated, and they were like, we're not going to do anything again, to be embarrassed like that again. But
The condition of the old part is much worse than the new part and needs restoration much more by a huge amount more than the new part. So if it gives us any leverage at all to get it registered, to get funds, that would be a huge impetus for us to proceed on the old part. The new part is not nearly so in need of restoration.
Yeah, there's all kind of grant money from the state and, the program, I mean, we just bought an old house and, they're the same person as who I'm talking to about getting help doing restoration. So they're all into it if you can fill out the paperwork and,
Right.
yeah.
Well, I'm thinking sooner the better because damage is being done all the time that could be salvaged.
So then a general consensus, how do we feel about moving forward with the historical designation of the old part of the cemetery? Yeah, I think so.
Yes.
Thank you very much for doing this work, Carol.
we will press on.
All right, that's great. Yeah. All right. So yesterday I met with the Hudson, the new Hudson Parks Conservancy group. They are a new budding organization here in the city of Hudson that's going for 501(c) nonprofit status to help raise funds for the parks within the city of Hudson. So I met with them yesterday, and myself and Tamar, who's doing the Friends of Oakdale Beach Park as well, to see if maybe their Friends of the Cemetery group could be like a branch or a committee or a subgroup of the Hudson Parks Conservancy, and hopefully once they have their 501(c) status, that we could use that as well, so we could take in donations and funds to help do various repairs. So I met with them yesterday. I think the conversation went well. I'm waiting to hear back from them. So if that happens, then we would have another way of taking money in, because then people can make a donation, it would be a tax deduction, and so that would be a good thing. And also, Gail Granginetti has told me that she got a quote from Roma Fence a while ago regarding repairing that new, the fence along the Newport Road? Newman Road. She said the quote that she received, which was a couple of years ago from Roma Fence, was like $40,000. Right. So I was thinking of going back to them and maybe updating and seeing if that quote is still valid. And I'm sure, and she said it was a few years, I don't know. So, and do we want to get an estimate on the fence? Is that a priority for this group? Or How do you folks feel about the fence?
I mean, if it's less than an estimate, all you have to do is go on.
Right, that's what I figured.
Kind of assessment.
How many years ago was it?
I don't know. Gail said a few.
This
So,
is back on Moon Road?
Yeah.
Or- Okay, what about the one there on 23?
well, that's the other question too, is that if they come to do an estimate, I could tell them to do whatever,
Yeah.
that kind of
Yeah.
estimate. You know,
Yeah.
like maybe they give us multiple estimates on
Yeah.
multiple fences.
Yeah.
He didn't have the fences in here.
He doesn't have the fence in there, no. No, this is just the actual,
Amazing.
since the last meeting.
I believe it.
Since the last meeting. I know, right? I mean, and all this, like I said, once, you know, in terms of applying for grants, things like this. Oops, sorry. All right, so what I'm gonna do is this, I'm going to call Roma Fence and ask them for another,
Roma Fence is going to repair this?
well, or any other fence company. That's who she called initially. We can get a few estimates.
But what are they going to do? I mean, it's an old cast iron fence.
Well, that's a good question.
I think $40,000 is probably replacing it with some
With a new fence.
kind of like aluminum
Probably
fence.
the easiest thing.
Should we get a quote for a cast iron fence?
Yeah. Yeah, we should, get someone to repair the fence instead of replacing it
To
with
repair it.
something like, what they're talking about is probably the same thing that's in front of the new police station at Black.
Oh, well, who knows, right. Well, you know, we tell them what we want.
No, you should,
I think you need a different.
I have the name of someone, of the people who repaired the fence for Phil Foreman when somebody jumped the curb and smashed into the fence around his house. And that's probably the person, that company should be called in to give an estimate for, replicating the missing fence and repairing the existing fence.
Is it bad, the fence?
Well, lots of it is absolutely gone,
Oh,
and just from like,
Yeah.
black,
Yeah,
snow fencing
Yeah,
and the
yeah.
the
missing
use of
spots.
aluminum is very poor because you take the farmers home.
Oh, I
The deer
know. They
hit
go right
that
through.
and the deer just bends them and bends them. And the deer down by the cemetery are there all the time too, so you'd have the same thing going through it.
Well, the deer actually can jump over, I mean, the fence
Yeah,
on
down
Newman
there
Road
it's only about
isn't
4
high,
foot.
isn't so high that the fence, the deer can't just jump right over it. 'Cause I've seen them, they just leap over and.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I think part of that fence is in Greenport too. The upper end of that cemetery is in Greenport.
All right, well, I'll get the person number and we'll get a couple of estimates then for fence repair. We'll see how that goes. All right, so we had talked about doing like a stone cleaning day. Do we want to maybe, we'll talk about that, I'm thinking maybe sometime in the spring, a Sunday in the springtime, we get some volunteers, we do some promotion, get people to come out, what I'm thinking is, and maybe Sue, you can help us, do a little demonstration for people so they know.
Well, it took more than a day to do each stone. It was like maybe about 3 or 4 days I would go over.
To do a stone.
Yeah, because first you had to scrub it all down with just plain water, and you got to bring your own water, you got to and carry it up the hill. I soaked it all down, and then I just brushed it up. I used like a soft brush, went over everything, and then I let it dry. And then I had bought something, I can't remember the name of it now, but you mixed it with water, and then I scrubbed it all down with that like 2 or 3 times, and they were pretty filthy.
Yeah.
And then I waited a couple days to see what happened. And then sometimes I had to go over it again with like a harder scrub brush. And then when it all dried, then I sprayed it with this stuff that it was supposed to bleach out the stains in it. And the first one that I did after I sprayed it on it, it turned yellow. And I was like, oh my God, what did I do? But then after about 2 or 3 days, it got all the stains lightened on it, and it turned out very nice. But it was, it took me, as I progressed doing it, I could do 3 or 4 at a time, if they weren't real big. But, it would still take a week or so to go over, for an hour or 2 a day.
What about program that's sort of like adopt a stone? You know how there'll be like sections of highway and you sort of adopt one, and then that could be, 'cause if it's going to take more than a day, then it could become like a family project, and people, like a group of friends, say, could take one on, and that might be a nice way to sort of get people a little more involved.
I mean, I don't know.
Just because one day doesn't sound like we get very far.
No, I mean, you could start it in one day, but if you start having too many different things going, then you have, all kinds of people going over it different. I mean, I don't know, I just did the work by myself, and
But I mean, if you gave a tutorial, say for example,
yeah,
and
but
then
still, I talk to people and they're like, oh, I've got one of those power washers, I'll bring that. And I'm like, yeah, I don't think I can do that. And then they said, well, how about I'll put bleach on? I said, no, you can't do that either. So you really had to.
But if you gave a tutorial to people on one day, say, and then there were instruction sheets and people knew what to do and there was a procedure and they knew what product to buy and then
I mean, the cemetery did reimburse me because I had to, it was a photographic cleansing stuff. I must have been like a surfactant or something in it.
Right.
And that was what I used to wash it with. I think I also used ammonia at one point on a couple of different ones to try it out. And then I bought a spray thing, I can't remember what the name of that was, but that was the thing that kind of bleached out the final stains.
Was the ammonia effective?
Not really, not as good,
Because it's porous.
Yeah, they were just, I mean, it was,
Did you put a sealant on then at the end?
No,
Is that
no, and I guess in theory what you do is like every year you go through and you spray this stuff on it, and that's supposed to.
It's like a retard.
Yes, it'll inhibit it from growing back. I did go over, I've been over and I looked and most of them have stayed pretty good. So, but I went through in the fall and I sprayed each one with the stuff and, but.
I mean, it seems like maybe like just a day where people could learn how to do it
Yeah.
would be great, and then they'd know what to do, and there'd be a product list, and you wouldn't have people going in with the wrong stuff.
The only thing that I would suggest is that you just pick a small section to work on, so that you're not all over the place, and then that way you could take a picture, of what it looks like first, and then after 2 or 3 weeks when, the stones are all cleaned and everything's cleaned up and it's weeded and all that, then take another picture, because it's way more effective if you have a whole group of stones. And then the ones I've done, they were all over the place. I mean, I did take a picture of each one as I did it, but if it was in a whole group, it would have looked really cool. But these were, up on the hill and down the hill.
Well, maybe it would be good to sort of start with a little area.
And like when you first go in there off the road, there's a section, and I actually did one of those stones, and there's a lot of older ones there, and it's not a big section. And you could just say, we're going to do these 2 or 3 or 4 rows, and, however many stones, and just see how it works out. I mean, some people might say, yeah, this is not for me, and other people will be like, oh, I have friends that would love to do this. So at least it would give you a kind of a.
Right. Also, in the materials the handouts from last meeting, which are also in the Facebook group, there is a section on stone cleaning.
Yeah.
And it does talk about even that different stones should be cleaned differently with different materials to keep in mind.
Well, a lot of the real smooth ones, the marble, I don't think are really an issue. It's those old limestone ones.
Right.
And those are the ones that.
Right.
And I use, like a whisk broom, do you have in those little, things? And that's what I use to scrub it with. So that's kind of soft. I didn't use any, I tried like a scrubby thing one time, but it, this was just, I just kept, scrubbing and scrubbing and scrubbing. So one time ants came out of
Would there be opportunities for like high school students to get involved? Like, is this something that like Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts would be into? I mean, it would.
Well, I know the seniors, at least they used to, have to do a community project. you know, so when my kids were there, and that was something that they had to do at the end of the year, so.
Because, I mean, you know, kids are energetic.
Yeah.
What about tapping into a lot of these, like the banks and everything, they put together a community day where they do a community project.
Yeah,
And want to, you know, maybe tapping into the bank.
yeah.
And,
Other employers too.
Right,
The-
yeah,
the
right, their
law
employees
firms,
actually do.
The law firms and the accountant firms in town might be willing to.
Etsy has a volunteer program for their employees.
Yeah, like all those employers, I think that's a great idea.
So would you be willing to maybe give a tutorial?
Oh, yeah, I can do that. Get everything out that I've used so I know.
Mm-hmm.
And then what I used to do is I would just buy it from Amazon and they reimbursed me. So the cemetery would.
Oh.
So I did try one, I think I planted flowers in front of each one until I found out I had to go around and water them every day. And I was like, oh my God, I'm not doing this anymore. Here's a flag for you. So that was a really hot part of the summer where they,
Great. Well, that sounds good. Is there any particular time maybe we could do like a little tutorial day?
yeah, I mean, just let me know. I you know,
Yeah.
usually around, but. there's
Wouldn't it
no-
be possible to
There's-
video?
I'm sorry.
Oh, there's an idea.
Yeah.
I mean, could we
There's
do it like on
you
location?
know, a plastic thing as you first go in.
Video.
That's it, but yeah, I used to say
Then it
those
could be
big
posted
cat-
on
Could we post it
Yeah,
like a little
website.
tutorial on
Yeah.
how to clean?
It's people like that, and then you could upload it to YouTube
And then I
and,
would just, and they, because they had.
you know, just because people, I don't know, I'm that kind of
I could
learner.
drive
I
on.
like
And I
to
just like carry that stuff up
do
the hill.
things.
Even the fact that someone's there shows interest.
Yeah,
But it was, you know, what, it was
it's more fun too.
It was nice because there was nobody around and I kind of just sat there and did it for a couple of hours.
So I'll put some dates out there.
Okay, good,
and,
yeah.
You know, we could decide
Yeah.
it's sometime in the springtime
Yeah,
to do
okay.
that. And people had other ideas on other events, or like someone want, you know, like Kelly does her Halloween tour right before Halloween, and she does that there. But anyone else, any other maybe things that we could do?
What were some of the suggestions that you had?
Well, for instance, I mean, even Bindlestips, they do a show in the Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn. You know, if we ended up with getting nonprofit status, we could do maybe a fundraiser to help pay for supplies and things
What
like
about
that.
something because of the nature of, you know, a walkathon or something through the cemetery? You know, so you walk through the grounds.
You could work like a tour, like a walk.
Well, it could be a tour, but you know, they have them. You know, instead of a run, people walk through the grounds.
Where people pledge money for you.
Right. You can bring your dog. You can bring, you know, just a day, a nice easy walk. You know, leisure walk. But you know, you just get sponsors for yourself, and you know how many miles you want to walk or however you want to do it. It's just taking advantage of the grounds.
That's an idea.
You know.
We could do something like that.
Would it be possible for people to, are there parts of it that would be available if someone wanted to, say, have an event, an appropriate sort of event there? That they could rent it and then pay the 501c3
I'll pay into it.
to rent a space for an event?
There
Or
actually is a house that people rent and people live in too, there too. I don't know. I mean, we
It's
have
also
to-
a very bad condition, the house,
Is that the
where
big
the
white
office
house?
is, yes. It's in bad shape.
Yeah, I think it's helped.
That house too was nominated for designation. It was. Yep.
I know, I guess the question is, where do we start, folks? Where do we start? I mean, I'd like to think that no matter what we do, it is better than nothing, you know? But the question is really like, where do we want to start?
You were talking about money now. Anything that I bought, the cemetery reimbursed me. Is there a reason that they wouldn't do this on a bigger scale? I mean, it's not like I needed a huge amount of anything in it.
No, I mean, but But that cemetery fund is just coming out of the city budget.
Yeah.
I mean, which is
yeah.
fine.
But,
you know,
well, what about people that pay for, that was something that Gail said to me once, you know, people pay for perpetual care, and it's not, I'm not getting it. So,
I thought we organized to ease the burden of the
Well,
expenses
exactly.
of the
Right.
cemetery.
Right,
okay,
so,
yeah,
right.
right, okay. Well, in any case, stuff's not expensive anyways.
Right. And I think that people will donate.
Yeah.
I mean, and
Yeah.
definitely businesses would help to donate. You know, but yeah, right, we're not talking a lot of money either.
Yeah.
I mean, if we do like stone cleaning equipment, we'll be talking
Yeah, like
like,
$100
Right,
maybe for
exactly.
enough for like a lot
Right.
of stuff.
right.
What's the biggest expense in the cemetery? Is
I would
it the
imagine
lawn?
mowing the lawns. You know, because you have to pay staff to mow the lawns and then they go and they weed whack. And that's, I mean, removing trees, you know.
That have died.
About 5 people in the summertime who work in the cemetery full-time, at least. I mean, they're always working. And this year, I noticed they continued, they seem to still be working in the cemetery. I thought there was a summer cemetery crew, but they're still,
These are city employees?
yeah, they work
And
in
what
the
are they
Department
doing?
of Public Works.
Oh,
What are they doing now?
yeah. I mean, is it,
They're driving trucks around,
And
they're
snowplows.
plowing the paths through the
Trees fall.
cemetery.
There's no new graves on any old part. is
There are.
Oh, are there?
A few.
Oh, okay.
There are a few right on the very top edge. As recent as like a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, right, if we ever wanted to think like long-term, like if we did want to have alternate methods of mowing, like if you wanted sheep or goat or something else, which other cemeteries do use, we'd have to then think about fencing off that area
Right.
so that the sheep or goat can stay there. And yes,
you can
then,
use temporary fences? I mean,
Or
that's what
temporary
you-
fencing.
You know, you just set them up, the animals graze, and then you move the fencing, and then you just rotate it around. I mean, that's the way I've seen it done. You know, then you
Right.
don't have to put up anything unsightly. It's
Mhm.
just a temporary thing.
But the sheep stay there all the time then?
They-
you can rent them.
You rent them. Yeah, you rent them, they go farm and they.
Are you aware of any cemetery in America that does that? Okay.
Yeah. There's one in New York City, but there they have a shepherd who comes and herds the sheep into a little house every night so that they're not left out. And we may want to consider herding our sheep into a little house for protection overnight as well.
Right, I mean, there are foxes and coyotes. And
Well, it's not the foxes and coyotes.
I see.
When I was there, though, the guys that worked there that mowed the lawn, they were very, very helpful. They
Oh,
came, they
right.
pulled out tree trunks for me
Right.
in different areas. They were really very nice, and they were, so,
You know, they're a good bunch.
yeah.
They're a good bunch. Well, what I could do is I could contact one of these companies that do rent out sheep, because I think there's one here, not actually that far from us, and see if,
I thought, though, the last time at that last meeting, you talked about that, and then somebody said, no, you can't do that. I think it might have
There
been.
was a woman.
I think it
who
was
said
Gail, wasn't it?
She had, I don't know if it was Gail, but it was someone who said that she owned sheep, and
Uh-huh.
she knew that you can't just let sheep out and expect them to mow the lawn for
Yeah,
you. So,
yeah.
it seemed more complicated than.
Yeah.
But there are cemeteries. There's one in New York City.
Mhm.
I think, what is it, Syracuse or Rochester has sheep and goats
They
in
use them in other public buildings in France, all over Europe now. They do this like the libraries and other public buildings that have lawns. They just bring in fact, right in central Paris, there's one.
I mean, 100 years ago, that's what they did.
Yeah.
And even that's why some of the stones have sheep on them, supposedly, from what I understand.
That makes sense.
Yeah, there's photos of the White House with,
Sheep.
yeah, because, who had lawnmowers, I mean, it would be, I'm sure that the farmers who rent them out have these temporary enclosures, and I'm sure it's business now for them, and,
Well, I can give them a call and see what they say.
yeah.
Maybe
Might as
they're
well.
willing to speak to us,
Yeah, I'm sure.
see what the deal is.
Do they do a nice job? Nice tidy job.
It's nice and tidy, yeah.
Supposedly the sheep get close to the stone, you know, to go and weed whack.
Yeah, they'll just eat everything.
We had goats on our property one time, and a farmer came by and just put in simple electronic fencing, so invisible, really.
Mm.
And it's on a solar-powered electric line.
My God, dogs would go
I mean,
nuts.
not for nothing, I think it would be, I think a lot of people would be,
Yeah.
would enjoy
Yeah.
going to see that, yeah.
Right.
Because, you know, it's like people with their families, I mean.
And right, if we had a nonprofit set up then, and you have people go there and see the sheep, and they can make a donation.
Yeah,
You could take the petting zoo.
well, you know, everyone likes sheep, well, they're cute.
Find someone that hates them.
What's that?
Probably find somebody that hates them.
Well, maybe.
But actually, I grew up in Connecticut and we had sheep and the story was always we had them after the war to cut the grass. I don't remember them ever being let out of their section to cut the rest of the grass, but that was the reason we got sheep.
Oh, yeah, just to take care of your lawn.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they're very gentle animals, so.
And on the graves, what are they gonna say about people, sheep running around the lots?
What do
Pat
you mean?
thinks sheep might be an issue.
Remember the issue about dogs? What do people wanna say about sheep?
Well, unless we kept the sheep only to the old part of the cemetery, maybe.
And there is family still living.
Mm.
I
Well,
know
they
I
would
have
be,
family that is buried up there.
Mm.
Carl Whitbeck, yeah.
But you can enclose them in these, like in these temporary shelters, and then that way they don't go running around, they're just in an enclosure.
Okay, now.
And then you move the enclosure. Yeah.
City approval?
Well, yeah, we'd have to go to
Yeah.
DPW and ask them, make sure that they are on board.
I
Yeah.
mean, you have water troughs, I imagine, somewhere.
And you'd, right, you need to feed them, water them. They would need a shelter.
And water, yeah.
Right, feed and water, right. Well, like I said, we'll call I'll call the sheep rental place. Sheeps are us.
It would probably be more useful if somebody were to contact the, you know, cemetery management of, you know, one of these cemeteries that uses sheep.
Right,
to,
right.
You know, to talk about their experience, because, I mean, the cemetery in New York City is one thing, but the, you know, the cemetery in Rochester or Syracuse, and I think there's one in Schenectady as well.
Right.
That's a more, you know, they would have a more, their experience would be more, you know, sort of relevant to what our experience might be.
Right. The guy, that's right, the one was scared. So give them a buzz and see what they say. All right. What else? Any other kind of like, any other?
Well, I just had one thought, is that if it's presented to DPW, it would be no doubt a huge cost saving. I mean, the way I think to present it might be if there were pushback from DPW, because they might feel that they're losing work. But I guess the way I would see it is that there's so much other work in Hudson to do, so many crosswalks that haven't been painted and other kinds of work, so it would just be shifting away from a work that maybe isn't, you know, it's using a lot of funds, and instead they could be doing other work, so it's not like a displacement of workers so much as a reprioritizing.
Well, those funds can be used for other city projects.
Right, yeah, there's more than enough work.
I mean, geez.
Yeah, there's more than enough, yeah. But by law, the cemetery must be maintained to
Yeah,
a
of
certain,
course, yeah.
you know, so we could offset some of that by, you know, either finding funds because there's no funds to fix the fence, I'll tell you, in the city government. So if we get the historical designation status, if we get a quote or something for the fence, and maybe that's a grant that we go after, getting the fence repaired, because there's no funds in the city budget for that. you know, if there's any way to long-term maintain the lawn, or at least help to maintain it. Who knows? Or even, like you said, just to have a benefit in the cemetery itself. I mean, that's what maybe we should do maybe in the springtime we should also think about a field trip up to the Oakwood Cemetery in Troy, which is an amazing cemetery, and to see and to talk to them and see what they do. You know, because they raise around $300-400 grand, and they with a 300-acre cemetery, and they do it without any public funds whatsoever.
Spectacular crematorium.
They have a spectacular crematorium. Yes, don't use those two words together too often. But it's true. They have a spectacular crematorium, and or you use those two words. But yeah, and they have events. They have like a big Christmas holiday event. No, it is, and weddings. They do dozens of weddings.
People pay to
People
have their
pay
weddings.
to have their weddings in well, it's a chapel with a crematorium next to it. And at the time, crematoriums were still a little iffy. Not a lot of people got cremated, so it was kind of a big deal to be cremated then.
I mean, there's
But-
a lot of wedding business in Hudson. I mean, if it were, you know, it's a beautiful place. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I used to, when I lived in Brooklyn, I just went to Greenwood Cemetery just to take a walk around. It's pretty. I don't know if is that how they're raising money, or?
I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, and the Bindlestiffs, they perform in Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn. Maybe they could do a similar fundraiser for us here in Hudson. I can ask him, see if he'd be interested.
Where would they have that?
That's a good question. We'd probably have to like rent a stage,
Yeah.
you know. But if it's a nice night, and if you find a spot, and, you know, some lights, some music, they put together a show. Anything else, folks? What else? Anyone else want to talk about? What else
I'll
could
talk
we?
about the geese.
Oh, the geese?
Because I think a lot of geese make an awful lot of mess. And a lot of people thought it was the dogs and it was the geese. And I've been down there and counted like 40 geese on that little pond down there. And I don't know, I might talk to Rob if they do any kind of moving them off someplace else, or just look at that. Get them to keep from multiplying so much. I mean, that's too many geese for one little pond there.
Yeah.
And it's
They
an awful
find
mess
you.
in the summertime. It's just disgusting.
Like once you got geese,
Yeah, you gotta
and
get rid
climate
of
change.
Then we get the dogs
Yeah.
actually help keep the
certain time
geese
frames.
away.
Or the foxes?
Geese are not fazed by the presence of a dog at all.
Yeah.
Well, a sheep herder dog will herd them off somewhere.
Well, actually, someone who lives up in Mount Ray Estates there has a retired Australian Shepherd who used to be an active herding dog. They're not fazed by that dog either. But you're right. I mean, this spring there were 4 couples. And each of them had like about 6 babies. And then suddenly there were, 4 couples times 6
Yeah.
babies, and
They'll be back.
they all grew up and they're
back year
still
after year,
there,
too.
yeah.
Isn't it gaggle? Isn't the collective noun gaggle?
I'm sorry.
Isn't it gaggles of geese?
Used to migrate, and they're not migrating anymore. You see a lot of them lingering around much later in the year.
The seagulls down at the river.
Oh, I don't
You know what a mess they make
Yeah.
down there. It
We
seems to me
had a
I've
problem
heard
with geese
something to
at our
that.
camp, and what we did was, because there's a time frame that they come back, because remember, we put up these big tall flamingos, and that scares them away. And so in one season they were gone, because they go by memory of when they come back.
And what was
Flamingos, big pink flamingos, you put in the sand. Yeah, because they were afraid of them. They didn't know if they were real. So they were afraid of them. And so within the season, they were gone. So we just put them in the sand. Because there's a time frame with geese kind of lay their eggs and kind of do their thing. And once they have the memory around July or whatever, they stay. But there's a time frame to get rid of them.
Usually whenever they're born, they go south in the winter, they come back to the same spot where they were born.
Yeah.
So you think if we get pink flamingos and put them in the...
I don't know.
It's worth hundreds of
It's worth a Google to
Yeah,
see if it's true, and if it works.
I guess it's like a scarecrow.
Like a scarecrow.
Goes around the
Whatever works.
If it works, I guess, I'll look into it.
Yeah, I'll research it more, but that's what we did.
Yeah, I'm gonna leave you on that, Don.
But
I'm leaving you on that.
Okay.
You are the Pink Flamingo Committee, subcommittee.
yeah, I got the polar bear and when I
And you got the polar bear, and I got pink flamingos. All right, folks, so this is what I got here. So Carol's going to move forward with the historical status of just the old part of the cemetery. And everyone's okay with that? All right, good. We're gonna get a fence company to give us some estimates on fences to see if we were to get, let's say maybe, who knows? Maybe there's a really big donor out there who likes a cemetery. You never know. You put it out there that we need a new fence, this is how much it costs, and see what happens. We're gonna also look, I'm gonna talk with Sue, we're gonna put together a date that we could do in the springtime, like a nice little cleaning session, and we'll get some supplies. Like a walkathon, I might put you on that too, Dominic. I'd like to do a walkathon too. We'll look into that. We'll figure out like what that would entail, really. I'll look into
Would you have a run through the cemetery?
cemetery run.
Yeah.
Yeah, lots of people run in the cemetery.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
You know, you could do.
well, you could do run walk. I mean, you don't want to
Yeah.
exclude people the same day you can do a run walk.
Or like the gala, like the,
Yeah.
You know,
You could do a 5K through the cemetery. I mean, there's certainly.
Absolutely.
Steve on that.
like, right. Yeah, like the ghostly gala.
Yeah.
It can raise a lot of money.
Yeah. All right. And maybe that would be, well, the ghostly gala, they do when? They do that around,
Isn't that in October?
that is in October, yeah, it is around Halloween time. So that would have to be the fall anyway. I'll look into sheep rental and bindle stiffs to see if they could come. And I will plan on the meeting. Anyone else? Any other ideas? Well, that's all I got. Anyone got anything else? Thanks all very much for coming. Have some good.